This actually was suggested by our own Lee White. Too much perspective. What did you mean by that, Lee?
Mm.
Once people, I guess the same thing could be added with anatomy, but I'll talk about that in a second. But it's where you've learned the rules of perspective, and now all of your illustrations basically become a perspective assignment.
Mm,
And what you're really trying to say with perspective is here's a space that moves, or there's an environment that moves back in space. There's a million ways to solve that problem that does not use linear perspective. I guess I should add that to it. That's what we're talking about. Is
Mhm.
when you have a vanishing point and all the vantage things point back there, and you see that with definitely with people who are in that beginning perspective class because everything looks like the train tracks going back. It'll be a
Right.
road, a path, whatever, and everything's just zooming back and everything pulls back to that vanishing point. And if you're really trying to convey space, I try to tell people like solve the problem with the other options, which are design. Anytime you have an overlap, you've now indicated a spatial relationship.
mm,
That's all perspective does. Anytime you have a change in scale, you've introduced um, a size kind of metric in there. If you
hmm
have two lampposts and one's bigger than the other, well, automatically, almost no matter where they are on the page, we'll read that as being closer, the bigger one being closer.
hmm
So there's all these design tricks, and some of them may be better for your image than tracking back a vanishing point.
mm. One thing that I've noticed is with beginning students, and I have this in my creative composition class, enough, also at svslearn.com, where you can learn how to illustrate like the pros.
You don't even know the slogan
I don't know it.
for SVS.
I have no idea what it is.
So good.
It's like, hey, where you too can be awesome at doing drawing. No, I've noticed that, and I've given this assignment a bunch of times, and I put examples in that class from this. Was as I would have my students draw from their head, because sometimes I'd want them to draw with reference, and sometimes I want to. This was basically a test, but I wouldn't tell them it's a test. So I'd say, I want you to draw a garage with the garage door up, just a garage of a house, and I want you to fill it with items that you would find in a garage. And interestingly, what I normally get on the first pass, because then I show them examples from the previous class when they got a second run at it after I showed them what would make it more dynamic.
Mhm.
And what the default is, what the normal illustrator usually does, is they draw. Well, let's say they draw like a trash can, they draw a barbecue grill, they might draw a set of weights, they might draw some boxes, maybe an exercise bike, different things like that, and they'll give space to each one. They won't overlap them,
Oh,
and they also will put the camera. They'll pull the camera back so that everything gets equal billing, equal size. So what you end up having is a bunch of objects that are all about the same size, roughly,
yeah.
and they're all small. And then I go through I will show them my small, medium, huge lecture, which is, instead of going with objects that are small and then including medium and big for variety, I want to over exaggerate their minds or stretch their minds so that they can exaggerate and go with small to tiny objects, medium sized objects, and huge objects that have to crop outside of the image area,
Uh-huh.
and they have to overlap each other. And I think one of the hardest things for illustrators to do is to draw something, because it requires drawing that barbecue grill and then putting something over top of that drawing, which is throwing away perceived value, right? You spent time drawing the barbecue grill, and it's so hard for beginning illustrators to then eclipse it with something and only have a piece of that barbecue grill sticking out. But yet that's what creates a much more dynamic image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add anatomy to that too, just as
Yep.
an add-on?
Add away.
So the same, I can always tell when people are taking the anatomy class when they're in their foundation, because all the people look like He-Man. And whether they need muscles, everybody's got muscles everywhere. Like I can see everybody's traps in there, sternocleidomastoid connecting into all these little, they got everything showing. And what I try to tell students coming out of that class is muscles have a function. And so if all you listeners right here, as long as you're not driving, make a big bicep muscle, it makes a muscle on top, but if you notice the bottom side of your arm, it stretches it, it relaxes that side, it straightens it out. In other words, you can't have flexed muscles on both sides of your arm.
Right.
You can't. And so you got to think about function. You can't just know the anatomy and just put it all over the place. You have to say, okay, what's going to be flexed? What's going to be relaxed in a pose? And then also the anatomy needs to support the pose, the gesture and all that stuff, not just be tacked on because you've learned some new muscles.
Right. Perfect.
That's a good one. I think too, also with like any sort of machinery or tech, you're gonna you can go really overboard there. And I think that the rule I always say is the 80-20 rule. Maybe it's a 70-30 rule. I always go back and forth because both work, but 70% of your image should be one visually one thing. It should be open space with 30% of it being busy space, lots of line work, lots of interest, lots of contrast. And then the 70% should be like a place where your eye could rest, a place where, it's just dead air. And that's where you get a really dynamic. And that goes to character design. It goes to, if you're designing a spaceship or a vehicle or a house or something like that, have the house favor one or the other, where you have all this detail in the shingles and in the roof, but then the walls of the house are just blank and easy to rest, for your eye to rest on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good general rules to follow.